Let me know when, Mary. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Ann Winklemes, founder and director of the Tilt Higher Ed Project, Transparency in Learning and Teaching, and TILT is the acronym for that. And today we're going to be, whoops, doesn't look like that shared. Hang on. Today we will be doing a workshop. I think you see that now. And you'll be tilting or applying transparency in learning and teaching principles to your own example, your own instructional materials, whether that's going to be an assignment in a course or a student-facing document or a protocol for advising students. So I'm going to use the TILT framework to offer an overview of how we're spending our time this morning. So the purpose of our time is for you to apply transparent design principles to your contexts by focusing really intensively on your own examples. We'll start off with the task. The way we'll go about that is I'll start off with a brief research review just from last time. So a reminder of what is transparency in learning and teaching and how do we know it works? What does it look like? And then you'll work together in pairs today, randomized pairs, to revise your own examples. And I'll walk you through a 5-part process. You'll get to work with 2 different partners over the course of the morning. And our criteria are these. By the time we're done, you'll leave with some strategies and tools for applying the TILT framework to your own situations. And you'll have had some intensive practice in using the framework, and you'll walk away with some draft revisions to a student-facing document or an assignment of your very own that you could start to use immediately. When it comes time for you to choose an example of something that you're going to tilt, some materials of your own, I wanted to just put up some descriptors of what kind of example, if you don't have one in mind yet, I'll put this in front of you so you can think about this is the kind of example you might want to choose. So whether you're an instructor and you're doing this in the context of a course, or whether you're a staff member doing this in the context of an interaction with students, you'll want to pick something that happens early in your interaction with students, something that is difficult for students, something that counts, right? A skill they need, an assignment that maybe counts toward the grade, and then something that students struggle with that doesn't work out totally successfully at the moment. Because if it's perfect already, then there's really no need to be tilting it. So those are kind of some descriptors of the type of example that I hope you'll choose for our exercise a little later on this morning. So here's the quick reminder part about what TILT is and how we know it works. When we say TILT, or transparency in learning and teaching, we mean that we're talking, in addition to talking with students about the content or the what of the course, we're also talking about the how and the why. So how are students learning course content? Why do we manipulate their learning experiences in the ways that we choose? And how will students use this learning in their lives, not just now or next year, but after college, after they've finished their degree, when they're out in the world? And this is a conversation that we want to be having out loud with students explicitly in a back and forth kind of way, so that we know that they understand these aspects that often are only in the teacher's head that students might not necessarily think about in the moment. We want them to be thinking about these and talking about these. What does TILT look like? You've got several versions of the TILT framework in your handout. And Mary, I'll ask you maybe to pop that into the chat one more time. Thank you. This is what the TILT framework looks like. And you've got a version, the student version is the first one that you'll see in your handout. That appears on page 3. That's sort of the most straightforward version of the handout. There's a teacher's version on page 4, and then a staff version on page 5, with some examples of staff implementations of TILT that appear on page 6. But just working from the TILT framework, the simple version on the student's version on page 3, The idea here is that before students start doing any of the work we're asking them to do, we want for them to really understand and to have communicated with us back and forth about three aspects of that work before they start doing it. First, the purpose. What skills will I practice? What knowledge will I gain? And how is that useful to me later in my life? Not just now, but later. The task. What should I do? What process should I follow? What actions should I avoid? Or if you don't want students to know what the process is, because part of the goal of the assignment is for them to make up their own approach or their own process, then just tell them that up front. The purpose of this assignment, or part of the purpose, is for you to struggle and feel confused while you make up your own approach to the question, to the problem. And then the second part, that's the task, the second part. And the third part of the framework is criteria for success. We want students to know before they do the work, what does good work look like? Because we want them to be able to self-evaluate while they're doing the work. Finding out after it's done that it wasn't adequate, or that it wasn't exactly what we were hoping for or what we expected, that's kind of too late to find that out after the work is done. We want students to be able to make corrections in real time while they're still doing the work, while there's still time to adjust it. Now, in order to do that, often we give them a rubric or a checklist to describe the kind of work that we expect from them. But the problem with a checklist or a rubric is that it has words that mean something different to the student than they do to us in our disciplines. And maybe the words on my rubric mean something really different to you in your discipline. As an art historian, when I was teaching art history courses, I would often ask students to analyze a sculpture, a Renaissance Italian sculpture from the 15th century, say a sculpture that depicts a saint, right? And when I use that word analyze, I expected a certain kind of analysis from students that looks really different from what the engineering professor expected when they said analyze, or the nursing professor expected when they asked students to analyze, or the statistics professor, right? Analyze is a completely different activity depending on the context. So if the student's never done that kind of analysis before, they need examples of what it looks like. And the reason we don't just give them one example is if you give students one example of something that's high stakes, that counts toward their grade, that they've never done before, that they're anxious about, they're just going to copy that. They're going to cling to it. And we want for them to see there's multiple ways to approach the assignment. There's multiple ways to succeed. The other reason for giving multiple examples is students, you can ask them to pick out which ones are the stronger or the weaker examples and why. And in that back and forth conversation with them, you'll be able to help them see why some of the approaches are more effective than others, why some of the work is more high quality than others. And that way, students will begin the assignment with the knowledge they need about purpose, task, and criteria. There are many reasons why TILT is gaining attention. I think probably some of the biggest reasons are, first of all, this is a tiny change to existing teaching practice. It will feel probably very consistent with your own goals for teaching. It's kind of the way that teachers think about student instruction, but students don't recognize that. So it's about sharing our process with students. So this is a small change that has significant gains, and those gains are equitable, meaning the value of this, the benefits are statistically significant for all the students we've tested. And they're even more helpful for underserved students. First generation, low income, ethnically underrepresented students benefit even more. And this is how we know it's an equitable practice. Here's another reason why you might want to use TILT at your institutions. I asked you a couple of questions on a survey that Mary shared. And I asked you sort of, what are, first of all, the biggest challenges or barriers that students are facing for their success, their academic success in your courses? And I listed those from your responses over on the left-hand side of the slide. And your students are facing big challenges around preparation, motivation, and time management. And I have highlighted in red font there all of the challenges your students are facing that TILT can help you with. Over on the right-hand side of the slide are some great evidence-based practices that you in your collective wisdom are already using to help address some of the barriers and challenges that your students are arriving with. And I'll give you a look at some of those. And I'll just highlight a few. Some of you are giving students an opportunity to begin the work in class where they can come up against a problem or a confusion, and you can help coach them through it right there and then. You've got sort of compassionate, flexible due dates, a lot of you, and you're breaking the work into smaller pieces so that students can get feedback after each part along the way. Tilt is something that's going to help students see the value of what they're gaining in real time. At the moment, we know from a recent Strata Gallup education survey that only 29% of BA graduates and 12% of those with college experience agree that they learned important skills at college that they're using now in their day-to-day life. And we know that more than 29% of the time, we're offering students opportunities to learn things and practice skills that they will be using in their day-to-day life. The problem is that students just aren't recognizing that in the moment. Here are some skills that employers really look for. I'm pulling information from 2 different national surveys of employers. The yellow highlighted characteristics are in the National Association of Colleges and Educators 2024 Job Outlook Report, and the background piece is from the AAC&U's National Survey from 2021, done by Hanover Research. And Tilt is going to help you make students more aware in real time that these are the skills that they're developing. In fact, Tilt is going to help you. We've measured students' awareness of these 6 skills at the top of the slide. So we know that students become more aware of their development of these 6 skills when they're in a situation that is more transparent, when they're receiving transparent instruction, when they're creating transparent instruction with their instructors. And those 6 skills figure prominently not only in the US learning frameworks down on the lower left of the slide, but also in the international learning frameworks down on the lower right of the slide, which means Tilt will help you prepare students to recognize their development of skills that they can use anywhere they go to work on planet Earth. Tilt is also something that will help you clear away some of the barriers to student success and help to establish a more equal state of readiness and resources for that one piece of work that you're asking students to do. Because students arrive to us, and many of you have talked about the level of preparation that you see in your students. Students arrive with any number of these barriers to their success, sort of through no responsibility or no fault of their own. They're experiencing some of these challenges. Some of them are experiencing more of them than others. And we know from Sia for Sheldon's work on bandwidth recovery that these all reduce students' capacity to learn. And from Kimberly Crenshaw's work, that the more of these you pile on, the more difficult it is for students to continue. So Tilt is something that will help, because it will, when you present students that Tilt framework on page 2, and you give them whatever your particular task is that you want them to do, just ask them to tell you what they see as the purpose, the tasks, and the criteria. And they will show you exactly which are the barriers that are creating an unfair situation for the different students in your course. Or if it's a one-on-one consultation with an advisor, they'll show you what barriers are in the way, and Tilt can help you clear away some of those barriers. Particularly, Tilt can help you clear away 3 of the barriers that are the top reasons why students consider dropping out of school. And this is a 2024 survey by Gallup that shows you the top reasons why students consider dropping out. And Tilt can help you address the 2, 1 at the top and the 2 at the bottom of this list. How do we know Tilt works? There are 4 research studies that are, in the last 10 years, 8 years, that show us a lot about how tilt works and how we know it's equitable. I won't go into them in great detail like I did in our first session, but just to remind you, there was a national study that we did with the AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, where we looked at every type of minority serving institution in the country. And we saw that students, underserved students benefited even more, and all students benefited some to a statistically significant degree. We did a retention study at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas to look at students' persistence from year to year. We looked particularly at a group of community and technical colleges all across the state of Washington to see how tilt works in a 2-year setting, specifically. And then just last week, last Tuesday, a new publication came out by Oja and colleagues about how tilt is helping students of color, particularly Black and Hispanic students, in computer science courses. In all of these studies, we asked teachers only to tilt a small amount, right? You don't have to tilt everything. Just twice in a term was enough to show us that students who received 2 tilted assignments in one term gained academic confidence, a sense of belonging, and more metacognitive awareness of their skill development. Those are big predictors of student success. According to researchers on your bibliography page, that's page 2, like Walton and Cohen and Hausman and Ye, we know those are predictors of student success, and tilt is helping to establish those predictors. We also saw greater gains for the underserved students, as I mentioned before, making this an equitable practice. And we saw long-term increases to persistence and retention rates, not just to the end of a course or to the end of the year, but even into the 3rd year of college. We saw higher persistence rates of about 14 to 15% for the students who received tilted instruction. Now, I want to show you just some examples of how tilt is being used in the world. To my knowledge, on 6 continents, tilt is used at the large scale, sort of in terms of national and state education networks, all the way down through, regions of the country or institutions, and down to activities and assignments, learning exercises. And that's what you'll be focusing on today. But at the statewide level, here's an example of what tilt might look like. The purpose here was for a statewide system to help students know that they were gaining 10 specific skills that employers wanted. And by the end, you see that the criteria are that students would recognize and demonstrate the skills, and the communication with stakeholders and employers around those skills would also be important. Here's how one school used the tilt framework to focus on one skill that they were going to promote. And their goal was to help boost students' communication skills by focusing on those in their co-curricular activities, not just in their academic courses. And they mapped this out in terms of the purpose that students would develop the communication skills in their co-curriculars. They mapped out the tasks of how they would approach it, and they mapped out the criteria, including employer surveys would show an increase in the students' communication skills, and students' work samples would demonstrate that increase. But this was a sort of much more complicated version of the purpose task criteria framework than you would want to use to communicate out to the general public. And this is a shorter version of how they summarized this for general communication to their stakeholders. And I'll just give you a look at that purpose task criteria. So you've seen tilt used as a strategic planning tool, as a communication tool. Here it's used as the framework for a job description. So here we've got an example of a building manager job. It's a work study job at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The job description was written in this way, purpose task criteria. And then when students were evaluated throughout the job, purpose task and criteria is exactly how that evaluation process was approached. So it was all aligned very carefully. You could tilt an e-portfolio for students so they could demonstrate their skills, their rationale for their approach to those tasks, and then applications where they could use these skills in their career. Here's an example of how an advisor is using the TILT framework, or a whole advising staff actually was using this TILT framework to work with student athletes. So students would see the framework, they would know that this is how their weekly meetings would go. They could expect this process, they could expect this conversation every week, and the staff would consistently use this framework to frame those conversations every week with the athletes. You can tilt a whole first-year seminar course in terms of the purpose, the skills, the knowledge. The tasks would be the learning activities, and the criteria would be how you evaluate it, whether it's low stakes or high stakes, whether it's peer evaluation or teacher evaluation. You can tilt a whole syllabus because what are the top 3 questions students want to know when they're thinking about taking a course? They're these. What will I learn? What do I have to do? And how will my work be evaluated? That's purpose, task, and criteria. You could tilt a syllabus simply by putting skills headings in addition to topic headings. Here's a page out of an old art history syllabus of mine, where you've got the dates and the topics, and they're chronological through Michelangelo's life. And then every few weeks, you've got a skill set that I wanted the students to recognize that we're focusing on this skill set during this phase of the course. You could tilt a teacher-student meeting or an advisor-student meeting. Tilt a meeting about declaring a major. And there are a few more examples of these on page 6 of your handout. Some colleagues recently at University of Nevada, Las Vegas tilted a staff meeting. So the advising staff tilted their own staff meeting about, in this case, it was building safety. But this was how they structured that staff meeting. So there are lots of possible applications for TILT, but you're going to be using TILT to apply to one of your own learning activities for students. And again, these were the descriptors of what I would recommend if you're thinking of an example to choose. And you really do need to have an example in mind, because the next thing that I will ask you to do is that we're going to pair up with a disciplinary stranger, and I'm going to walk you through a 5-part process for peer feedback. But part 1 is going to be just this. You're going to just introduce yourself to your partner, and you each get 2 minutes to describe your example or your learning activity, your process, your assignment to your partner. On purpose, I am giving you not enough time to do this because I want to create some cognitive stress. I want to create something that might approximate a student's experience when they're focused for 2 minutes on what you're saying about an assignment. And if, let's see, you might just want a little bit of who goes first in this interaction. Just maybe go in alphabetical order of first name, if that's helpful, but you can do it as you wish. But the key thing is you only get 2 minutes to describe your example. So if you've got it on paper, you can share it, but you still just get 2 minutes. And then I just want to know, before I send you out into pairs, what questions do you have? What do I need to explain better before you're ready to do part 1 of this 5-part process? 2 minutes each to describe your example to your partner. You can unmute or put in the chat what I need to explain better, please.
Marianne, you're going to randomly pair them up?
I'm going to assign you randomly. Yes, I am.
Thank you.
And if you end up with someone who's exactly in your discipline, such that when you say the word analyze, they're going to know exactly what you mean, then please come back out and we'll try to repair you with someone else who might have ended up with an exact disciplinary colleague. All right, I'm going to open up these rooms. Hang on, I've got to recreate them. If I see anyone so we have an even number of people. So we ought to be able to arrive in pairs. But I'll be here in the main space with Mary and we can reassign you if you end up with someone right in your discipline. Take a minute to introduce yourself and then I'll tell you when 2 minutes is up and it's time to switch. I see people read. Okay,
Did we
great.
just get pulled back?
So now that we're all back, you've had a couple minutes to describe your specific example to a partner. And now part 2 of our process is about to begin here. Can you mute up because I'm hearing some feedback. Thank you, everybody. So part 2 is now coming right up. And part 2 is this. It's going to focus on the task of your partner's assignment. And what I want you to do right now is just write down a list of the actions you would take if you were the student to do your colleague's example. And we'll do that right here without communicating with your partner, because I want to make it as confusing as difficult as possible. And I want to make it possible for you to misunderstand some piece of the process, either in a way that is a great idea and helpful to your partner later, or in a way that makes your partner think, I need to revise to be sure students don't do that. So just take a couple of silent minutes. And maybe you could put in the chat a little signal when you feel like you're done with your task list. I'm guessing it'll take about 2 minutes. Make the list as detailed as you possibly can. Right, so maybe you're going to call someone for help. Maybe you're going to go online. Maybe you're going to ask Google or ask AI, or maybe you're going to work with some colleagues in, some fellow students in your dorm or in your course, but just every part of the process you would take until you submit the work. You're doing this from memory of the conversation you just had. Yes, thank you, Jill. So you got 2 minutes worth of information. That's all I gave you. And see if you can make that into a list of all the actions you would take to do that example, to do that work. And you will be sharing this list back with your partner soon. See if we can wrap that up in another minute. Give me a signal in the chat when you're ready to move on. All right, when you're ready, the next part you'll do is you want to answer a question about the purpose of your partner's assignment. And I'm going to ask the question this way. 5 years later, so we're assuming that the degree is finished and students are out in the world doing something. 5 years later, what skills and knowledge do you still retain because as a student, you used them doing your partner's assignment or your partner's example? What skills and knowledge do you still remember? Do you still recognize? Do you still retain? We know only 29% of students can do this, according to that Gallup survey. But what skills and knowledge do you still retain from doing your partner's assignment? And again, give me an indicator in the chat when you're ready to move on. This part is usually a little quicker than the task part. So I'm seeing some readies already. I'll give it another minute. All right, now I'm going to move you on to the next part. I want to just call your attention to page 7 in the handout, which has some verbs on it that might be useful when you go back to talk to your partner about the particular process if you're struggling for vocabulary. Those verbs will be there. It's from a Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, but it's a sort of list of skills from simpler skills at the top to more complicated skills at the bottom of the list. And the verbs that you could use to ask students to use some of those skills. So that might be useful for you, page 7. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go back into your same partner, into the same partner pair, into that same breakout room, and you're going to share those lists back and forth with your partner. And think about how, just a back and forth conversation. So each person shares their list, and then you talk about how you might revise those assignments. While you're doing that, try to jot down some of those good revision ideas so that you'll remember to use them with your students. And I'll give you 5 minutes for each example. So that's going to be 10 minutes out there, which should give you enough time to talk in some detail about each example and do a little bit of revision. So I'm going to ask you again, just to make sure, what else can I explain better before I put you back into those rooms with your partner? You can unmute or you can tell me in the chat what I need to explain better. I'll give you a 5-minute warning halfway through. Last time you had a 60-second re-entry window. This time I'll put that down to just 15 seconds, so you'll come back more quickly. Okay, now that we're back, I'm going to I want to show you a few questions on the screen that we always want students to know the answer to before they start doing a tilted assignment. And the three questions are at the top of the slide here. And I think right now, if I've designed this the way I intended, you would answer no to all three of those questions because I only gave you 2 minutes to hear about your partner's assignment. So you're probably not confident that you're working effectively. You're probably not confident you're doing excellent work. And you probably don't have multiple examples to show you different approaches or what's really, what's a really good example and what's an okay-ish example, because 2 minutes isn't really enough time for that to happen. So I want to send you back to this partner one more time to talk together about how you would change your example so that students could answer yes to all of these questions. They would know what good work looks like, and they would know that their working process is effective. They would know that they're spending the right amount of time, or they would know that the details of what they're doing are helpful and efficient and effective. And this time, I think we'll give you, let's try maybe 8 minutes total instead of 10 minutes total. And I'll give you a 4-minute warning partway through. So go talk about